Suddenly Camus spoke and made it clear that she wouldn't marry anyone weaker than her mother and didn't want a significant age gap in her partner. Adolf tried to persuade her by saying that she will have to live alone rest of her life if she wants to marry someone stronger than her mother. Hugo also didn't seem pleased with her attitude and reminded her that engagements weren't a buffet of her choosing. But Camus was confident in her choices and claimed she had no intention of playing around. Suddenly, her face turned red, and she looked to the side, catching the attention of Adolf and Hugo. Adolf was shocked when he realized that Camus was looking at Vikir, and started cursing him in his mind. Adolf couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He whispered to Camus, urging her not to even think about it, as Vikir was from the Van surname and not from the La descent. Adolf believed that no matter what happens, Vikir would merely be a small fish in a big pond. Hugo, on the other hand, was getting increasingly frustrated with the situation, so he decided to intervene and reminded everyone that the most important thing in engagements was what the people involved had in mind. He then turned to Vikir and asked him for his thoughts. Camus looked at Vikir, waiting for his answer. Camus and Vikir exchanged looks, and then Vikir spoke up and said, "I accept." Adolf became visibly upset at Vikir's response, but before Adolf could say anything, Vikir continued his sentence and added that, "I accept to do as I'm told." Adolf was even more outraged at this, wondering how someone could have such an attitude towards the daughter of the Moor clan. On the other hand, Camus was blushing from head to toe, wondering what Vikir's response meant. She couldn't help but wonder if he was shyer than he portrayed himself to be and if he wasn't opposed to the idea of their engagement. Hugo stated that names and titles had no meaning in the Baskerville household, and that great people come from those of Van descent, not just those of La descent. However, Adolf seemed skeptical about this statement, especially when it came to Vikir. Adolf stood in front of Vikir, examining him closely. Vikir, in turn, looked back at Adolf and thought about his reputation as a sixth circle master and one of the strongest mage within the renowned clan and supporter of his niece. Adolf then spoke up, saying that he didn't think it's quite wise to tell Vikir this, but they couldn't have just anyone become Camus' husband. Vikir thought about how engagement was merely a suggestion between clans and wondered if Adolf was not satisfied with even the genius of the Baskerville clan. Adolf then placed his hand on Vikir's shoulder and tried to press him down, but Vikir didn't budge. Adolf was surprised by Vikir's sturdy body. Adolf then asked Vikir why he wasn't answering him and was he even listening to him, and Vikir replied that he hadn't been listening to him since he said it wasn't wise to tell him something. Camus was shocked at Vikir's reply, especially since he said it to her uncle, who was one of the strongest mage. On the side, Hugo tried to control his laughter in the midst of the tense situation. Vikir's response caused Adolf to laugh menacingly. He turned to Hugo and requested to have a deeper conversation with Vikir. Hugo questioned Adolf's intentions and asked if he was going to scold an 8-year-old child. However, Adolf responded with a laugh, stating that Vikir may become his niece's future husband and that he was making the request as an uncle rather than as the deputy patriarch of the Moor clan. Camus tried to stop his uncle and pleaded with him not to do this, but Adolf ignored her and claimed that this was bound to happen to someone eventually. He then turned back to Hugo, asking him to grant him the opportunity to have a conversation with Vikir. Hugo reluctantly agreed, saying that if Adolf was that adamant, he could have his chance to have a deeper conversation with the child. But it turned out that this deeper conversation wasn't a talk but a duel. Vikir and Adolf stood facing each other in an arena while Hugo and Camus watched from the sidelines. Adolf announced that he would be testing Vikir's abilities and instructed him to show everything he was capable of. Vikir agreed, but thought to himself that if he showed everything, Adolf might pass out. Adolf then casted a spell and started creating a pot. Camus explained that his uncle was making a pot using fire, earth, and water magic simultaneously with perfect control, which was typical of her powerful uncle. Adolf then filled the pot with water and placed the pot on his own head and challenged Vikir to a duel. He instructed Vikir that if he could make a single drop of water fall from the pot, it would be considered a victory. Vikir observed the pot and thought about how challenging an opponent like Adolf would be a great experience, and thought about his own win rate against Adolf prior to his regression. Vikir analyzed the situation and calculated that an assassination attempt would have a 50% chance of success, and a 10% win rate if he were to face Adolf head-on. Vikir decided to approach the situation carefully, knowing that he only needed to do enough to satisfy Hugo's expectations, and also he wanted to see what Adolf was truly capable of. Without warning, Vikir charged at Adolf with his sword in hand, running in a straight line towards him. Camus, who was watching from the side, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She shouted at Vikir, telling him that he couldn't run straight towards Adolf. As Vikir's sword came crashing down towards Adolf, He cast a barrier spell, blocking the attack. Adolf was amused at Vikir's attempt, and questioned Camus as to why she was helping Vikir, while saying that shield magic was best used against swordsmen. Adolf knew that it would be difficult for Vikir to pierce through with most aura swords. Vikir was frustrated with the failed attack and clicked his tongue in annoyance. Adolf decided to take the offensive and started casting spells towards Vikir. Vikir, being nimble and quick, started dodging the spells effortlessly. Camus interjected, exclaiming that it was unfair as Adolf never used this level of magic against her in their duels. Adolf was taken aback by Camus' support of Vikir and asked her whose side she was on. He then turned to Vikir with a crying face, calling him a bastard and promising not to forgive him. Hugo watched the battle unfold, analyzing the two combatants. He noted that Vikir was attacking at a speed that was difficult but not impossible to dodge, and decided there was no need to intervene. He wanted to see what Vikir was capable of, and show the old man what a young hound could do. As Vikir dodged Adolf's spells, he analyzed his opponent's abilities. He knew that he could use his knowledge from before his regression and his current age to gain an advantage. Adolf smirked at Vikir, claiming that his sword would never pierce through his shield. However, Vikir's attacks began to break the shield, catching Adolf off guard. Adolf noticed that Vikir was attacking at the same point on the shield with his sword and was impressed by Vikir's machine-like movements and swordsmanship. As Vikir was attacking with his sword, it suddenly broke into pieces, causing Adolf to smirk and taunt him about his lack of consideration for the durability of his sword and the strength of his shield. However, Hugo and Camus, who were watching from the sidelines, had shocked expressions on their faces. Adolf continued to speak, unaware of the surprised reactions of those around him. Suddenly, water started pouring on his face, completely covering his head in a matter of seconds. Adolf shouted in surprise, wondering how a piece of the broken sword had managed to pierce the pot and drench him with water. Vikir, with a smile on his face, commented that the pot seemed to be full. Camus, who witnessed the unexpected turn of events, blushed and exclaimed in disbelief that Vikir had won against her uncle and started thinking about the possibility of marriage. Meanwhile, Hugo, who was standing beside Camus, realized that the incident with the broken sword was not just a coincidence, but a sign of Vikir's exceptional talent and strength. He couldn't help but wonder if he was raising a much stronger hound than he had initially anticipated. 7 years had passed since the young hounds first stepped foot in the Baskerville training grounds. Today, they faced a fierce monster that resembled a bear with horns. As the monster charged at them, the young hounds attacked it with their swords, one after another. Watching from the sidelines was Baskerville clan shadow hound Staffordshire Baskerville, the instructor of the young hounds. He knew that facing opponents stronger than them was a daunting task, so he shouted out instructions to the young hounds, telling them to aim for the hind leg to slow down the monster instead of targeting the vital points from the beginning. The triplets among the young hounds coordinated their strikes, leaving the monster exhausted. Staffordshire was impressed and thought to himself that their dark crimson aura was very suitable for the Baskervilles. After the triplets had weakened the monster, the other young hounds resumed their attacks and finished it off. Staffordshire applauded the young hounds and congratulated them on becoming low-rank sword experts and masters of the first Baskerville technique. Staffordshire reminded the young hounds that they were facing a caged monster and that the wild ox bear on La Rouge et Lenoir mountain would be quite different. He warned them that death could occur much more easily than they thought, and they must use their bloodline to overcome it or build their experience to survive somehow. With that, the instructor concluded the 7-year training and congratulated the young hounds on their graduation. He wished them good luck in their future endeavors. After the successful completion of their training, the young hounds started chatting among themselves. 2 hounds were discussing their preferences for the various night orders within the Baskerville clan. The first hound mentioned that he preferred the Wolfhound order, while the second hound shared his choices, Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler. There were 7 night orders in the Baskerville clan, each established and managed for various objectives, such as watching, searching, guarding, assassinating, suppressing, and all-out warfare. Suddenly, the first hound asked his companion where he thought that bastard would go. The second hound asked in confusion who was he referring to. The first hound clarified that he was referring to the person sitting on the dead ox bear, who is none other than Vikir. They continued their conversation about Vikir, with one hound saying that Vikir had defeated a much larger ox bear than the one they had just faced, and that he was already a high-rank sword expert at the 3rd Baskerville technique, which meant that he was at the Shadow Hound's level. Vikir sat on the dead ox bear, lost in thought. He knew it had taken longer than he had anticipated to reach his current level, which was graduate intermediate rank at the 5th Baskerville technique. While his swordsmanship had improved greatly, he felt his growth was much slower than he had hoped for. Suddenly, head butler Barrymore appeared behind Vikir and addressed him as Master Vikir. The butler informed Vikir that the Patriarch was looking for him and that his assignment had been decided. Vikir, with a serious expression on his face, replied with a simple "all right." Vikir entered the Patriarch's office and greeted Hugo. However, he only received a grunt in response. Vikir noticed a cut on Hugo's nose and asked him what had happened. Hugo replied that he had been subjugating barbarians on La Rouge-et-le-Noir mountain, and that one of the archers had gotten the better of him. Vikir asked if he had captured them, but Hugo replied that he had not. However, he did manage to give the archer the same scar on her face. After a moment of silence, Hugo congratulated Vikir on graduating. However, his tone was ominous when he added that it was only going to get harder. Vikir wondered if Hugo was going to talk about the assignment now as he reminisced about his past before his regression. He had been a junior knight of the Pitbull Order, and was sent to the treacherous La Rouge-et-le-Noir mountain to face death non-stop for 21 months. He had been like an expendable mutt, immediately dispatched into battle upon his arrival. He remembered that the Baskerville children were categorized as either elite or expendable once they reached the age of 15. The expendables were sent to die in battle, while the elite were educated about politics and administration. Through numerous brushes with death, the experienced expendables eventually became guards to the elite, while the elite matured over time through practicing politics and administration. Vikir knew that the fifth Baskerville technique existed to let the elite catch up to the expendables' long hours and experiences with real-life battles. However, his swordsmanship had not been able to surpass the fourth technique prior to his regression. There was no way that Hugo, the one in charge, would let him, an illegitimate child, take a course for the elite. Vikir's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Hugo. Hugo suggested that Vikir should try the lower house of Parliament. Not fully understanding what Hugo meant, Vikir asked for clarification. Hugo explained that the lower house of Parliament assisted the Baskerville clan's regional administration, legislature, and law enforcement, as well as inviting businesses and looking after the region as necessary. Simply put, they managed both small and large matters of the clan. Vikir was surprised that Hugo had selected him, an illegitimate child, to take the elite course. Hugo continued, saying that Vikir's achievements were greater than any child who was referred to as a genius by 10 years. So, he would treat Vikir as such. The position that Vikir would be taking was the deputy consul of the underdog city. Currently, both the consul and deputy consul positions were vacant. Hugo asked Vikir if he would like to try it. After considering Hugo's proposal, Vikir decided to accept the position of deputy consul of the underdog city. However, before proceeding, he wanted to discuss an incident involving the Mork clan and the Ruby Mines. Hugo seemed to know about it already and referred to how Vikir screwed over Adolf Mork. Vikir confirmed this and asked if he could borrow his reward once. Even though what Vikir wanted to borrow was still not revealed yet, the head butler, who had an idea about it, was shocked at Vikir's bold request. But Hugo didn't seem to mind. He stamped a paper and assured Vikir that he trusted him not to do anything foolish. With confidence, Vikir promised he wouldn't make Hugo worry, but he couldn't help but think how strange it was to be called son by Hugo, something that would have been unimaginable before his regression. As head butler and Vikir walked down the hallway, the head butler spoke in a serious tone. He emphasized the Patriarch's high regard for Vikir, as evidenced by his appointment as a consul prior to being dispatched into battle. The head butler referred to this as the disciplines of kingship, suggesting that Vikir was being groomed for greater responsibilities in the future. However, Vikir was not complacent about his new role. He acknowledged that success was not guaranteed and that he would have to work hard to manage his responsibilities as deputy consul. Vikir thought to himself that this was an opportunity for him to hone his skills more safely. He wasn't particularly interested in current events, but his memories from his previous life were still vivid. He remembered the sensation of his head being severed from his body by the guillotine. Vikir decided at that moment that he will let Hugo the Baskerville feel the same sensation. In the Baskerville territory, underdog, in a large villa, a bald man gave orders to 2 workers, instructing them to ensure that the place is perfectly clean by the next day, as a new deputy consul from the Baskerville family was coming. The workers acknowledged his orders and said yes, sir. Later on, one of the workers wondered what kind of person the new deputy consul would be and hoped that he would have experience in business. However, the other worker told him that the new deputy consul was only 15 years old. While they were talking, a young boy was approaching the villa, and the second worker noticed him. He placed his hand on the kid's shoulder and wondered whose child he was and if any employee had brought him. The worker then told the boy that he couldn't just enter the villa freely. It turned out, the young boy who had approached the villa was none other than Vikir. With an angry look on his face, he ordered the worker to remove his hand from his shoulder. Then, he pulled out a paper and showed it to the worker, who was surprised to see that it was the document verifying Vikir's position as the new deputy consul. The workers were confused as to why he had come a day early, but Vikir was not concerned about that. He ordered the workers to prepare food and drinks for a party he was going to have. As Vikir entered the villa, both workers had questioning looks on their faces and wondered why the new deputy consul was planning a party. Soon, the party began, and the whole villa was filled with food and drinks. Many nobles were in attendance, enjoying the festivities and talking with one another. Chihuahua Baskerville, the general secretary of the city of Underdog, was pacing back and forth in his office, clearly agitated. He looked out the window and couldn't believe what he saw. The new deputy consul, a young man who had just started working for the city, was holding a party at the workplace. Chihuahua was already having a hard time because all of his predecessors had been dismissed for accepting bribes. And now, this guy was drinking and partying on the job. Chihuahua couldn't believe the audacity of this troublemaker. As he was about to express his frustration, Vikir suddenly appeared behind him and asked if he was the general secretary. The sudden interruption startled him and he almost jumped out of his skin. He was surprised to see Vikir and wondered how long he had been standing there. Vikir introduced himself as Vikir van Baskerville, the new deputy consul, and Chihuahua introduced himself as Chihuahua Baskerville. Vikir repeated Chihuahua's name, noting that he didn't have a middle name. Chihuahua thought to himself that it was going to happen again. He knew that a lack of a middle name signified that he was from outside the family and that he was employed rather than a blood member of the family. Chihuahua had to deal with discrimination from deputy consuls because of this. He was tired of being looked down upon and treated unfairly because he wasn't born into the family. But Chihuahua was surprised by Vikir's response. Instead of mocking him, Vikir placed his hand on Chihuahua's shoulder and simply said, "Nice." This threw Chihuahua off guard, and he responded with a confused look. Vikir went on to explain that he had scanned through Chihuahua's personal information on the way there, and had noticed that he was from Underdog. Chihuahua agreed with him, saying that he was born and raised in the current place they were in. Vikir acknowledged this and mentioned that he knew how hard people like him had to work and that he didn't intend to interfere with how he did his job. Chihuahua was still a bit confused but responded with an awkward okay. Chihuahua couldn't help but think that was this some new form of harassment, and wondered why Vikir was even there in the first place when he was the one who asked for the party. But Vikir continued, mentioning that while the personal law system itself didn't have a problem, there were many strange things about the judicial system. Vikir continued speaking, explaining that the problem with Underdog was that many illegal business owners were successful, and as a result, the underground held the power above the law. Simply stopping the illegal businesses wouldn't resolve the problem. The heads of the underground businesses needed to be removed. As a deputy consul, his job was to make laws and execute them, and while he respected all the laws that were already in place, he intended to add a new one. Chihuahua exclaimed in surprise as he heard the word new law. Vikir nodded and explained that he would make sure the underground economy was in shambles within a week. However, he needed a cause in order to make and execute this law. Chihuahua couldn't understand why Vikir needed a cause for getting rid of illegal businesses. Vikir explained that he was still young and a newly appointed deputy consul. He needed a performance in order to make it more convincing. Chihuahua still didn't fully understand Vikir's plan. Vikir looked out of window as his expression turned into an evil grin, and he said that to put it differently, I will lay out poop for the flies. Chihuahua couldn't help but wonder what Vikir was planning. The next day, Vikir arrived at Doorsmile Street in downtown Underdog. A huge crowd had already gathered there and people were chatting among themselves. Vikir stood on the stage with a stake in his hand. Chihuahua and his companions wondered what the deputy consul was planning to do. They commented that there were a lot of people there, and that the deputy consul had been standing there since the crack of dawn. Suddenly, Vikir stepped forward and announced that he was the newly appointed deputy consul. The crowd was surprised to see such a young man as the deputy consul, and wondered what he was going to do. Some of them murmured that he was cute while some questioned what a young man like him could do. Vikir ignored the crowd and said, I believe you have all seen this notice. These are laws that have been in place for a while. Even if the deputy consul has changed, the Baskerville family's laws are still strict as before and will continue to be upheld. However, the crowd did not seem to have any faith in Vikir's words. They muttered among themselves, questioning his ability to carry out laws at such a young age. Some even commented on the corruption of the higher-ups and thought that Vikir would soon fall victim to it. Chihuahua, who stood by Vikir's side, could no longer remain silent. He shouted at the crowd, demanding that they show respect to the new deputy consul. The crowd fell silent, but some still doubted Vikir's ability to uphold the laws, and they thought that Chihuahua might be a better choice for the position of deputy consul. Suddenly, Vikir's actions had the entire crowd in a state of shock. As he pulled up the stake, whole crowd fell silent, and all eyes were fixed on him. With immense power, Vikir then plunged the stake into the ground with such force that the earth around it seemed to shake. The crowd could hardly believe what they were seeing. They were amazed at the sheer strength that Vikir had displayed. But then, Vikir announced something that took everyone by surprise. He said that he would announce a special law, with his authority as a deputy consul known as the Vikir Special Law, which would award 100 million gold to anyone who could remove the stake from the ground. The entire crowd looked at Vikir and the stake in disbelief, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into a loud chorus of disbelief, shouting, 100 million. As the crowd gathered around him, Deputy Consul Vikir van Baskerville announced his new laws. The first law, known as the Vikir Special Law, Paragraph 1, Article 1, stipulated that whoever pulled out an appointed stake, henceforth referred to as the stake, would be paid 100 million gold immediately by Vikir himself. The crowd was stunned by the announcement and exclaimed in shock. They couldn't believe that they could get such a huge amount of money just by pulling out a stake. One person in the crowd asked if it was really that easy, and everyone murmured about it in disbelief. Despite the excitement, nobody came forward to pull out the stake. Vikir saw that no one was willing to take the risk, so he asked if there was no one who wanted to get 100 million gold. When no one stepped forward, Vikir declared a new law. The Vikir Special Law, Paragraph 1, Article 2, stated that the person who pulled out this stake would be paid 1 billion gold immediately by Vikir himself. This time, the offer was too tempting to resist. Suddenly, Vikir heard someone laugh, and he saw a fat old man in the crowd with an angry voice. The man exclaimed that it was ridiculous and asked if Vikir was making fun of them. He questioned who would attempt it, and the crowd began to murmur in agreement. But someone in the crowd pointed out that 1 billion gold was not chump change, and the mood shifted slightly. General Secretary Chihuahua, who was on stage behind Vikir, wondered why they were getting embarrassed instead. But Vikir ignored all the comments and asked if there was no one willing to take the challenge. With no one stepping forward, Vikir surprised the crowd once again by declaring a new law. This time, the reward was even higher, 10 billion gold. The crowd was stunned by the offer, and Vikir confidently stated that the person who pulled out the stake would be rewarded with the sum. As Vikir repeated his offer, the crowd was in a state of shock and confusion. Some wondered if it was all just a joke, while others were tempted to try their luck. However, others warned them of the potential consequences, saying that just look at the sword on his waist and the potential danger of being perceived as greedy by the deputy consul. Despite Vikir's repeated offers, no one came forward to pull the stake. As he was about to speak again, he was interrupted by Chihuahua, who whispered to him that there was not enough money in the city to fulfill his offer. Suddenly, a small hand shot up from within the crowd. The hand belonged to a little girl who had a flower basket on her other hand. She timidly asked if she could try. The crowd was shocked that this little girl was trying to pull out the stake from the ground. An old man recognized her as Judy, the flower girl, and tried to stop her. But Judy explained that her mother was sick and she had to try something. Despite the old man's warnings, Judy approached the stake and stood in front of it. She looked at the man behind the stake with fear and hesitation. Judy thought to herself, hoping to calm her nerves. She wondered if she would receive any payment for this act of bravado. She had volunteered to pull out the stake, hoping to earn a few coins for her efforts. She was hoped that at least she would be able to sell the basket full of flowers she had brought with her to the event. Without a word, Vikir simply said, "Pull it out." His voice was devoid of emotion, and Judy couldn't tell if he was angry or bored. She took a deep breath, grabbed the stake with both hands and pulled with all her might. To her surprise, the stake came out of the ground easily, as if it had never been stuck there in the first place. The crowd gasped in shock and disbelief, staring at Judy in amazement. They couldn't believe that such a small and frail girl had managed to pull out the stake so effortlessly. Judy looked at Vikir, who had been watching her intently, with the stake in her hand. Judy wondered if she had done something wrong, as Vikir made a motion as if he was about to pull out his sword. Her heart sank as she closed her eyes in fear, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She thought of her mother and wondered who would take care of her after she was gone. But instead of the sword, a hand with a bag appeared in front of her. As Judy opened her eyes, she saw Vikir on one knee, holding a bag filled with gold. Vikir, while giving the bag to Judy, said that for now, here is 100 million gold. Judy stood there, still in shock, holding the bag of gold tightly in her hand. Vikir looked at her and asked her where her home was, since 10 billion gold will be heavy, so he will have it shipped to her home. Vikir even provided her with a guard to protect her reward. Judy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Vikir then placed his hand on her head and said, "This is the law. It must always be obeyed." The crowd behind them was equally stunned, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Even Chihuahua, who had been watching the scene, had his mouth hung open. No one had expected Vikir to actually follow through with his promise to reward the person who managed to pull out the stake from the ground. The performance was a significant turning point, as it allowed the Vikir special law to become more famous than the self-governance law of the Baskerville clan. The citizens were touched by the simple logic of being rewarded for obeying the law and punished for disobeying it. People were discussing the new deputy consul, who was vastly different from his predecessors. Vikir was known for keeping his word no matter what, which earned him a great deal of respect from the people. The society in which principles were upheld was something to be admired, and the implementation of the Vikir special law led to a noticeable decrease in unlawfulness and a halving of crime rates. Chihuahua had just finished writing something on a board in the deputy office when Vikir noticed and asked if it was written in the Eastern language. Vikir complimented Chihuahua on his handwriting, and Chihuahua expressed his admiration for Vikir's daring performance. That left him touched for the first time after 20 years of working there. Vikir explained that ruling citizens with wrath when they belittle the law and do not trust it is not the way to go. He shared how he thought hard about how to get the attention of the citizens and leave a lasting impression, and that was the result. Chihuahua was moved to tears and pledged to follow Vikir for the rest of his days. Vikir tried to calm Chihuahua down. Vikir's mind wandered as he thought about the recent performance he had orchestrated. He couldn't help but compare it to the one that Camus Morgue would have presented years from now. While Camus had managed to reduce the crime rate to 1%, but she was never really liked by the citizens due to the fear she instilled in them. Looking down at the map on the table, Vikir noted that the problems were only just beginning, since the reward of 10 billion gold had been used, and they needed to find a way to get it back. After marking some locations on the map, he explained that the locations marked on the map were where there were potential illegal groups, or where they may hide in the future. Vikir was determined to maintain these locations and confiscate their dirty money. Chihuahua looked at the map in surprise and asked Vikir how he knew where the criminal businesses were located. Vikir pointed to his nose and claimed that he could smell them. In reality, he had already surveyed those regions before his regression and knew them like the back of his hand. Chihuahua was impressed by Vikir's flawless investigation skills and wondered just how much he had already investigated. Suddenly, a staff member burst into the room, interrupting the conversation between Chihuahua and Vikir. The staff member addressed Deputy Consul Vikir, informing him that the Village Hall's Youth Autonomy Association had requested a meeting. Chihuahua, seemingly unsurprised by the news, commented that it was probably time for such a meeting to take place. Vikir, on the other hand, referred to them as arrogant bastards and questioned why they would want to see him. Chihuahua proceeded to inform Vikir that the Youth Autonomy Association was made up of various clans, including the Mont Blanc, Pure, Luovi, Channel, Ferragamo, Hermes, and Pradar clans. He explained that the organization was founded by the second and third generations of the 7 native families of Baskerville. Chihuahua went on to describe the Youth Autonomy Association as a promiscuous social club, despite its name suggesting otherwise. He speculated that the young masters of the group likely had something to say about the Vikir special law. Vikir said in a questioning tone, "The dung flies have started to smell the shit." This statement surprised both Chihuahua and the staff member. Vikir smirked and suggested that they should start annihilating the pests that are eating away the city. Deep within the burning suspension, a high-end club located within the underdog city's most luxurious hotel, a party was taking place. The VVIP lounge, which had been rented out for a whopping 10 million gold for a 6-hour rental service, was filled with the 7 crucial members of the Youth Autonomy Association. These members were the second and third generation children of the 7 families located within the Baskerville territory, a powerful and influential area within the city. The atmosphere was lively as the members of the association were making a tower with glasses and pouring drinks on them. They boasted about the price tag of each bottle as they continued to build the tower, which had a pyramid shape. The blonde guy in the club turned to the waiters and instructed them to drink the spilled wine on the table. The waiters obediently lapped it up like dogs, thanking him for the opportunity to enjoy such a precious drink. As he sat down on a sofa, he boasted about his wealth, remarking that no matter how much he spent, his money always replenished itself. One of the blonde guy's companions attributed it all to the Baskervilles, who only cared about territorial expansion and not about the demand for slaves. He remarked that it was easy to kidnap barbarians and sell them as slaves, thanks to the Baskervilles. The companions agreed that this was all thanks to the Baskervilles, and that it was great because they didn't have to worry about the imperial family. Another companion chimed in, remarking that the Baskervilles were also protecting them, making them even safer. He compared the Baskervilles to their personal hunting dogs, pointing out that they were always at their beck and call. The blonde guy scoffed at the idea, stating that the Baskervilles were nothing more than sword-wielding idiots who were easily manipulated. He mentioned the incident with the Mesimaginero clan, where they were able to push the blame onto the Mesimaginero clan, which was one of the most loyal clan, and watch as the Baskervilles decided to massacre them personally. As the group continued to talk, one of the companions mentioned a new deputy consul named Vikir, who was of Van descent. The blonde guy questioned if anyone had heard of him before, and when they replied no, he suggested that they teach the young government worker a lesson. The plan was to invite him to a party with the best drinks and women, and once the party was over, they would force him to pay for it. The blonde guy was confident that the 15-year-old wouldn't be able to report them since he wouldn't have any money. The companions agreed, and the group laughed at the thought of their impending prank. As they were discussing their plan, a waiter entered the room with some girls, announcing their arrival. The blonde guy and his companions looked up excitedly, eager to enjoy their evening with the ladies. One of the guys noticed a young male accompanying the ladies and questioned his presence. The waiter was unaware of who he was and answered that he entered with such confidence that nobody questioned him. The young male was none other than Vikir. The waiter grabbed Vikir by his hair and, in an angry tone, demanded to know why he was there. However, Vikir's eyes glowed with anger, and suddenly the room fell silent as the group had shocked expression on their faces. As Vikir approached the group, the waiter noticed that his arm was bent at an impossible angle, causing him to shout in pain. One of the guys who had initially pointed out Vikir expressed his surprise at the sight. Vikir introduced himself as Vikir van Baskerville, and the guy repeated his name and recognized him as the deputy consul, and questioned why he was there. Vikir simply replied that they have invited him here. The blonde guy realized that the situation was getting out of hand and tried to calm down the situation and exclaimed with laughter, saying that it was amazing that he had come to the party. Vikir watched the blonde guy whisper with one of his companions, discussing something. The blonde guy asked if they should enact their plans, and his companion agreed, suggesting they see how Vikir deals with paying for everything. The blonde guy agreed and suggested they keep Vikir there and force him to pay once the party was over. Vikir couldn't take it any longer. He placed his hand on the table, interrupting their conversation, and demanded that they stop the pointless chatter. Suddenly, the whole table exploded, and glasses filled with drinks crashed to the floor, causing the people in the room to look on in surprise. As the drinks fell down, the blonde guy watched in disbelief as the table exploded, and his thoughts immediately went to Vikir's potential abilities. He thought, could he have used mana manipulation to make the champagne tower explode just by touching the table? The blonde guy realized that Vikir was a graduator. The blonde guy's companion was equally shocked and whispered in anger that they had thought Vikir was just a 15-year-old kid. The blonde guy snapped back, telling his companion that they were a middle-class expert and should do something. But the companion was too scared, knowing that they would lose in an instant if they tried to fight Vikir. Suddenly, Vikir placed his hand on one of the guy's shoulders and addressed him directly. The guy was so scared that he blurted out that they were going to pay for the drinks. Vikir questioned whether they were planning on forcing him to pay for everything, and the guy realized that he had made a huge mistake. Another companion spoke up, asking who would dare do such a thing. The blonde guy tried to calm the situation, saying that they only wanted to test Vikir, as Underdog City had become corrupt. They wanted to ensure that Vikir wouldn't be enticed by the city's offers. The blonde guy's companion agreed, saying that it seemed like Vikir had what it takes to lead them, and they would be sure to follow. Vikir suddenly attacked the guy sitting closest to him with a palm strike that was more like a claw attack. He clutched the guy's stomach tightly and delivered a stern message. An owner can test their dog, but a dog should never test their owner, no matter the situation. As he looked at the rest of the group, Vikir questioned whether they were unmoved by his actions because they had money and power. He warned them that they had never seen anything truly frightening before. Vikir threw the guy he had been holding to the ground and stepped on his face. He then looked at the rest of the group and asked if they knew why he had done this. If they didn't, it seemed like they would meet the same fate. The blonde guy's face was stricken with fear as he stuttered out a response, saying that they were well aware of why Vikir had taken such actions. But Vikir kicked the man's head on which he was stepping on, and told them that if they really knew, they would understand what he would do next. The group became angry seeing this, and blonde guy called Vikir a bastard, while another questioned if he thought he could get away with it. Suddenly, Vikir appeared right in front of the second guy and accused the group of committing crimes such as abduction, kidnapping, illegal slave trafficking, and insulting Baskerville. The rest of the group had a shocked expression hearing Vikir mention the crimes that they had done. Vikir then punched the second guy and told them that animals don't learn until you teach them. Vikir's face turned into an evil grin as said that now he was prepared to teach the disobedient creatures a lesson. In a dimly lit prison cell, two men stood with contrasting expressions. Vikir, the deputy consul, appeared unfazed while Chihuahua, the general secretary, looked on with a mix of shock and concern. Before them stood a blonde man with a beaten-up face, who was screaming and shouting at them, calling them all sorts of names. The man continued to yell, accusing Vikir of pulling some kind of stunt that would result in his father retaliating against them. He threatened to kill both of them once he was released, promising never to forgive them for what they had done. Chihuahua was visibly distressed by the situation and turned to Vikir, asking why the man had been beaten so brutally. Vikir asked if he thought he had overdone it, to which Chihuahua responded with a resounding yes. He expressed his disbelief that anyone could inflict such serious injuries on another human being, comparing the victim to a meat bag. But Vikir didn't seem to care. He walked towards the cell with a cold smile on his face, assuring Chihuahua that he hadn't even started yet. Chihuahua, on the other hand, looked shocked and disbelieving. He asked Vikir what he was planning to do, to which Vikir replied that he was going to execute all the wicked civil servants who had mutated into a hideous organization. He claimed that he could tell from their arrogant expressions that they lacked proper education, and that they had even overlooked the authority of the Baskerville clan. Chihuahua still couldn't believe what he was hearing. He asked Vikir if he was serious, to which Vikir replied in the affirmative. The blonde guy and his companions were now begging for their lives, promising to give Vikir everything they had if he spared them. Chihuahua then voiced his concern about the repercussions of Vikir's actions. He asked him if he was aware that the families of the executed men would not just sit idly by. They were cowardly, yet daring, and they would use whatever methods possible to avenge their loved ones. Vikir's confident smile remained as he reassured Chihuahua that there was no need to worry about the families of the executed men. He claimed that these corrupt officials were tied to the criminal organizations of Underdog City, and that their families would not be able to complain. Chihuahua, however, seemed to be concerned about the evidence against these officials, to which Vikir replied that he had his ways of finding evidence. He thought to himself that if he couldn't find any evidence, he would make his own. Vikir didn't seem to care about the events that would take place after this. He believed that the world was soon going to experience a sudden change, and he would most likely be dispatched into battle very soon. Even if that wasn't the case, he knew that he would have to leave this place once he enrolled at the academy. Vikir stood in front of the prisoners, his eyes cold and unfeeling as he gazed at them. Vikir listed out their crimes, his voice flat and monotone: human trafficking, kidnapping, bribery, blackmail, threatening, assault through a third party, and murder. The blonde guy immediately denied their involvement in any of those crimes and asked for evidence. However, Vikir just smirked and asked if they would accept punishment if there was evidence. After hearing this, the blonde guy looked down, his guilt written all over his face. It was like he was saying, "I'll never cause damage to the family, even if I were to die here." Suddenly, a man appeared to be walking towards him, carrying a bag. The man had a bald head, called out to Vikir. Vikir turned around, not surprised to see the man there. The bald guy placed the bag in front of Vikir and informed him that his custom order was ready. Vikir expressed his gratitude for the timely delivery of his order, and the bald guy just chuckled in response. Vikir opened the bag to reveal an assortment of tools, which he arranged carefully on a cloth. As Vikir was setting up his tools, the bald guy suddenly spoke up, saying that he had never seen some of these tools before, despite having been torturing people for 30 years. He asked Vikir how he had come up with such scary tools. Vikir shrugged and replied that he didn't invent them himself. They were common where he came from. The bald guy was taken aback and asked if Vikir had come from hell. Vikir just chuckled and said that it was something like that. And then he asked the bald guy if he would like to learn it. The bald guy quickly declined, saying that he might vomit everything he had eaten if he saw Vikir work with those tools. Vikir just nodded and looked at his tools, lost in thought. He missed the days of the era of destruction when even the demon clan's prisoners of war would spit out everything during torture. by torturing the demon clan. The torturing methods had evolved significantly. Vikir opened his coat and revealed his tools, causing the blonde guy to squeal in fear. Vikir looked at the prisoners and asked where their expressions were from before when they had claimed they wouldn't admit to anything no matter what. He then tied the buttons on his wrist and said, "Please don't say anything. I want to cherish the memories of my past for once." The blonde guy couldn't hold back the flood of tears that streamed down his face. Rumors of the arrest of the 7 wicked gangs quickly spread throughout Underdog City. As long as there was a gathering of more than 3 citizens, that rumor continued to circulate. In a nearby tavern, patrons were discussing the incident. One of them expressed relief that the arrested gangs were the ones who treated civilians like pests. Another patron doubted that the new deputy consul would release them anytime soon.